In response to our appeal, U.S. President Donald Trump made the decision to release two Russian citizens from the crew of the tanker Marinera, who had previously been detained by the U.S. side during an operation in the North Atlantic. We welcome this decision and express our gratitude to the U.S. leadership. We are beginning urgent practical work on all issues related to ensuring the swift return of our compatriots to their homeland.
Russia says the United States has agreed to release Russian crew members detained after a dramatic seizure of a Russian-flagged oil tanker in the North Atlantic, an operation that has sharply escalated tensions between Washington and Moscow. The tanker, identified as the Marinera, was seized earlier this week by U.S. forces after being tracked from the Caribbean Sea. American authorities claim the vessel was part of a so-called shadow fleet moving oil for sanctioned countries including Venezuela, Russia, and Iran in violation of U.S. sanctions. Despite reportedly being escorted by the Russian Navy, the tanker was boarded in international waters. According to Russian officials, the crew initially faced possible prosecution, an outcome Moscow called categorically unacceptable. On Friday, Russia's foreign ministry confirmed that U.S. President Donald Trump had decided to release the Russian nationals aboard the ship. Spokeswoman Maria Zakharova welcomed the move, thanking U.S. leadership for the decision. Russian Special Envoy Kirill Dmitriev later stated on Telegram that Trump had ordered the release of all Russians on board. However, the seizure itself continues to spark outrage in Moscow. Russian officials accuse Washington of stoking military and political tensions and threatening international shipping. According to Russian media, the tanker carried a multinational crew of 28 people, including 17 Ukrainians, 6 Georgians, 3 Indian nationals, and 2 Russians. Russia's transport ministry said it lost all contact with the vessel after U.S. forces boarded it. The tanker had previously operated under the name Bella 1 and was flying the flag of Guyana. U.S. officials say it repeatedly attempted to evade capture, changing its name, repainting its hull, and slipping through what Washington calls a maritime blockade of sanctioned oil shipments. U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem praised the Coast Guard and military for what she described as a meticulously coordinated operation against Ghost Fleet tankers. The United Kingdom confirmed it provided logistical and basing support during the interception in the North Atlantic. The seizure marks what analysts say is a rare and provocative move, possibly the first time in recent memory that U.S. forces have taken control of a Russian-flagged vessel at sea. While the release of detained crew members may ease immediate diplomatic pressure, the incident underscores a widening confrontation over sanctions enforcement, maritime security, and great power rivalry on the world's oceans.
In a high-stakes maritime showdown, the U.S. military confirmed it has seized control of a Russian-flagged oil tanker in the North Atlantic, an operation driven by alleged sanctions violations and carried out after weeks of silent surveillance and relentless pursuit across open seas. The vessel, MV Bella 1, also known as the Marinera, was seized under the authority of a warrant issued by a U.S. federal court, according to a statement by the U.S. Army's European Command. EUCOM said the tanker was intercepted after being tracked by the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Monroe, with the operation carried out in coordination with the U.S. Justice Department, the Department of Homeland Security, and the newly renamed Department of War, formerly known as the Department of Defense. The command confirmed the seizure took place in international waters in the North Atlantic. U.S. officials say the Marinera is part of a so-called shadow fleet used to transport oil for sanctioned states, including Venezuela, Russia, and Iran. The tanker had reportedly evaded earlier attempts by the U.S. Coast Guard to board it in December, while it was operating in the Caribbean, and later crossed into the Atlantic Ocean. According to Reuters, the ship had slipped through a broader U.S. maritime blockade, targeting vessels carrying sanctioned Venezuelan oil. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth underscored the administration's stance in a social media post, writing that the blockade of sanctioned and illicit Venezuelan oil remains in full effect anywhere in the world. Two U.S. officials told Reuters that both the Coast Guard and the U.S. military were directly involved in Wednesday's seizure. Russian state broadcaster RT reported that American forces boarded the vessel using a helicopter, publishing images of the aircraft hovering above the tanker. RT cited an unnamed source who said the ship had been shadowed by a U.S. Coast Guard vessel for weeks, and that at least one earlier attempt to intercept it was disrupted by severe weather conditions. As the operation unfolded, marine traffic data showed the Marinera edging closer to Iceland's exclusive economic zone, heightening the stakes by the hour. Reuters later reported that a Russian submarine and a naval warship were operating nearby, an ominous backdrop to the seizure, even as both sides stopped short of direct confrontation. Speaking from Moscow, journalist Dmitry Medvedenko described the pursuit as a prolonged cat-and-mouse game, noting that there had been multiple failed attempts to seize the tanker in recent weeks. The Russian government has not confirmed whether it deployed naval assets to escort the vessel, but Russia's foreign ministry said it was closely monitoring the situation. The ministry, quoted by Russian state media, argued that the tanker was operating lawfully in international waters and accused the U.S. and NATO of paying disproportionate attention to what it described as a civil vessel. Moscow called on Western nations to respect freedom of navigation under international maritime law. The Marinera was sanctioned by Washington in 2024 for allegedly transporting oil on behalf of a company linked to Lebanon-based Hezbollah. U.S. authorities say the seizure is part of a wider crackdown ordered by President Donald Trump on vessels connected to Venezuelan oil exports. Separately, U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem announced that American forces also seized a second vessel, the Panama-flagged supertanker M. Sophia, in international waters near the Caribbean. Reuters reported that the ship had departed Venezuelan waters earlier this year and was operating with its transponder turned off while carrying oil toward China. Reporting from Washington, Al Jazeera correspondent Kimberly Hallcat described the dual seizures as a significant escalation, saying they signal a coordinated effort to intercept and detain multiple sanctioned vessels operating far beyond U.S. territorial waters.